One day in North Carolina, near the home of a man named Patrick Conley, wild black bears appeared. The predators didn't just come onto his property, they started behaving very strangely, as if they were intentionally looking for something or someone. The bears walked back and forth and stared intently at Patrick's house, causing him confusion and even fear. Then the man carefully looked at the large black bear and suddenly realized that the predators had come there for a reason. They were looking for him. This story began 3 years ago when Patrick went for a walk in the woods with his dog on a cold winter morning. The man assumed that the forest would be safe because he rarely encountered predators in this area. However, to his surprise, 20 minutes from home, he came across a young black bear, which is usually hibernating at this time. At the same time, the predator did not look menacing, but rather very tired and exhausted. Most likely, the young and inexperienced bear had chosen a bad place for hibernation in the frosty winter and faced serious difficulties because of this. Patrick realized that without help, the animal would probably die, so the man brought fish and fruit from home, which the bear immediately ate. Patrick also brought several bundles of hay to make a warm bed for the predator. Then the man built a small shelter out of branches to further protect the bear from snow and icy wind. After that, Patrick left, hoping that the small shelter he had created would help the bear survive the cold winter. Patrick knew that he had done everything in his power to assist, yet, as he walked back to his cabin during a cold winter night, an unsettling thought wouldn't depart his head. He went on trying to imagine the life situation of the young bear when it is left defenseless in that severe cold. It blew and snowed fiercely throughout the night. Snow engulfed the trees of the forest and covered it with a layer of white. The time went on, but Patrick couldn't fall asleep. The snowstorm increased even more outside during that night, rattling his windows and groaning from the heavy load the roof had to endure. He again thought of the bear and was concerned whether the lean shelter he tried to construct the previous day would afford enough protection from the storm, which had now descended on the landscape with a vengeance. The fear that the bear might not survive gnawed at him until he could no longer ignore it. In the spur of the moment, Patrick put on the coat, gloves, and was holding the flashlight, planning on going out and checking up on the young bear, despite the risks of facing out there. As soon as he opened the door, he was stung by the bitter cold and compelled by fear to advance through the deep snow to the door, his chest racing as the lightning struck across the sky. Trees creaked ominously under the weight of snow and ice, and every gust of wind sent chills down his spine. The path to the bear's den, which had been clear before, was now nearly impossible to navigate. Snow clung to every branch and rock, turning the landscape into a treacherous obstacle course. When Patrick was struggling through the hurricane, he heard certain noises, soft growling and howling enhanced by the wind. His heart raced. Could there have been other predators to chase it away, or were they both alone? His mind immediately was taken by pictures of feeding wolves or mountain lions going through the snow in search of their next meal in the still of the winter. Each time there was a sound making him freeze up. It could be the snap of a twig, or even the rustling of branches. But he went further, carried by the fact that the bear was all alone, exposed, and can easily be in a life-threatening predicament. When he finally arrived near the spot where the bear had settled, his flashlight beam struggled to cut through the swirling snow. Then, as if out of nowhere, he spotted movement, a dark shape shifting through the blizzard. Patrick froze. The bear was awake, pacing nervously around the shelter he'd built. The animal's eyes gleamed in the light, wild and confused, its breath coming out in heavy, visible puffs as it clawed at the ground, clearly distressed by the intensity of the storm. The bear let out a low, mournful sound, one that sent a shiver through Patrick's body. It was too cold, too brutal for this young bear to survive much longer like this. Knowing he had to act quickly, Patrick gathered the remaining energy he had and carefully approached the frightened creature. His movements were slow and deliberate, not wanting to startle the bear into fleeing or attacking. The wind howled louder, as if the forest itself was warning him to turn back, but he didn't stop. Once he was close enough, he crouched and gently tossed another bundle of hay toward the bear, hoping it would settle back into its makeshift shelter. The bear hesitated, watching Patrick with those tired, fearful eyes before finally retreating into the shelter. Relief washed over Patrick as he saw the bear curl up on the fresh hay, but his work wasn't done. He reinforced the shelter with more branches, using his numb hands to pile snow around it for insulation. His fingers burned with cold, and every breath was a struggle in the biting air, but he wouldn't leave until he was certain the bear had a chance at surviving the night. After what felt like hours of battling the elements, Patrick stood back, satisfied that the bear's shelter would now hold. The animal let out a final soft grunt and settled deeper into the hay. For a moment, as Patrick watched the bear close its eyes, the storm seemed to quiet around him, as if nature itself acknowledged his efforts. Exhausted, Patrick turned to leave, feeling both triumph and exhaustion weighing on him. The trek back through the storm was just as treacherous, but he knew he had done everything he could. That night, he collapsed into bed, finally able to sleep, his mind at ease knowing he had given the young bear a fighting chance. A few days later, Patrick cautiously approached the same spot and was pleased to see that the bear had finally fallen into hibernation in the shelter he had created. Delighted, the man went home, trying not to approach the bear's unusual den anymore so as not to disturb its sleep. Over time, Patrick forgot about his good deed, continuing to live his usual life and hoping that the bear had managed to survive that harsh winter. 3 years later, while at home, Patrick heard a loud noise outside and looked out the window. The man couldn't believe his eyes because right on his porch, an enormous black bear with her cubs had suddenly appeared. He was shocked and a bit scared, as he knew very well that mother bears are especially dangerous and unpredictable when they protect their cubs. But the longer the man looked at the bear, the more it seemed to him that he had seen her somewhere before. Patrick felt a pounding, and yet he stood stock still, his eyes glued at the window. A large bear with her young is not only likely to be seen in the area, it can pose a danger. The last kind of visitor he has thought to encounter or desire were a mother bear and her cubs, and this bear was as big as she was, towering over her cubs who wandered curiously around his porch. His thoughts went out to all the tales he had ever been told about the raging and aggressive bad mothers, especially with their young ones. The weight of the situation hit him hard. One carelessness, one mistake, and he could cause a blow. Just as Patrick was considering whether to retreat or stand his ground, a sharp clattering noise came from the side of the house. One of the cubs, in its playful excitement, had knocked over an old rake leaning against the porch railing. The sound was enough to startle the bear, her posture shifting instantly. She reared back onto her hind legs, letting out a deep, reverberating growl that echoed through the trees. The sound hit Patrick like a shockwave, reverberating in his chest and sending adrenaline coursing through his veins. For a split second, he thought it was over. His mind raced, calculating the distance to the door. Could he get inside before she charged? The sheer size of the bear, her claws gleaming in the fading daylight, made him doubt it. His legs were shaky, his breath quick and shallow. He had to think fast. The cubs, sensing their mother's tension, huddled close to her legs, their wide eyes looking up at her for guidance. Patrick knew the bear was on high alert, every muscle in her body tensed and ready to defend her young. A few seconds passed that felt like an eternity, each moment stretching painfully long, as Patrick stood paralyzed by the uncertainty of what might happen next. Suddenly, something shifted. The mother bear, instead of charging, dropped back down to all fours. Her massive head turned slightly toward Patrick, and for the first time, he noticed a flicker of recognition in her eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a glimmer of something familiar, something that seemed to take the edge off her aggression. It was as if she recognized him, even after all these years. Patrick's thoughts raced back to that winter, the harsh cold, and the small, exhausted bear he had helped. Could this be the same bear? He had assumed the animal was long gone, lost to the wild or the dangers of the forest. But as he stood there, face to face with this enormous creature, the possibility became more real by the second. The bear let out a softer grunt, her massive form relaxing slightly. Patrick, sensing a change in her demeanor, cautiously opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. His movements were slow, deliberate, each step carefully measured so as not to alarm her. The cubs, no longer frightened, began to nuzzle around the porch again, their playful energy returning. The mother bear watched him closely, her dark eyes following his every move. But the tension in the air had dissipated. It was in this moment, as he stood there on the porch, that Patrick realized she hadn't come to threaten him. She had come for something else. The look in her eyes wasn't just one of familiarity. It was something deeper, almost like a silent form of communication. And then it clicked. This was the same bear he had once helped, now fully grown and with cubs of her own. Patrick's fear slowly melted away, replaced by a deep sense of wonder and awe. The bear had returned, not to harm him, but to show him something. She had brought her cubs with her, as if to introduce them to the man who had once saved her life. It was an extraordinary moment, one that transcended any typical human-animal interaction. This wild predator, this force of nature, was here to express something no one could have predicted: gratitude. With that realization, Patrick smiled. Slowly, cautiously, he moved toward the edge of the porch, watching as the bear nudged her cubs in his direction. He raised his hand, not in defense but in peace, hoping to show her that he meant no harm. And then, as if she understood, the bear took a few steps closer, her cubs following suit. Patrick's heart raced, not from fear this time, but from the sheer magic of the moment. He had never imagined that his small act of kindness years ago would lead to this: a reunion, not just with the bear, but with her new family. He knew then that the bond they had formed, however unlikely, had not been forgotten. Patrick fed the forest predators with fruits, which included some berries, before he played with them for some time before they went back to the forest. But this is not the end of an incredible story of saving the bear and the truly extraordinary expression of gratitude from her. From that specific day on, with Patrick naming the bear as Simone, the bear was frequently coming to his house accompanied by her young ones and without any signs of fear for the man with whom she decided to start trusting. The man and his peculiar visitors stayed much of the time outside in the yard, running around and discovering the place. Patrick started feeding the predators around his house and even documented their visits to produce such beautiful moments. The cubs quickly grew and became more confident and independent. They played joyfully in the garden, climbed trees and fences, and sometimes even played with Patrick. Simone behaved calmly and confidently, watching her cubs and seemingly not worrying about them at all, which confirmed her complete trust in Patrick. Wild bears usually avoid people and protect their cubs from any potential threats, but Simone knew well that the kind man could be trusted. Thus, one day, Patrick realized a clear change. The cubs started to get interested in his dog. When it became evident that he could not stop the predators from reaching the vicinity where his pet was, he found it worrying the cubs and the dog could get near the dog yet. To his amazement, the two started to play. The cubs again started rolling on the grass and was bouncing around the dog, while Simone never exhibited any signs of attack. Patrick didn't just observe the bear and her cubs, he actively documented their visits, recording them each time with a video camera. Thanks to these recordings, many people were able to see the unique friendship between a man and a family of bears and be inspired by it. Everyone admired the extraordinary relationship between Patrick and Simone, who, despite her wild nature, trusted the man with her most valuable possessions, her defenseless cubs. Nearly 4 years have passed since Patrick first helped the bear during a difficult period in her life. Now Simone and her cubs have become part of his life, constantly visiting him as if they were old friends. These visits brought Patrick immense pleasure and joy. He also began telling his friends about his unusual visitors, and soon the whole neighborhood knew about them. People admired and were inspired by Patrick's example, seeing how care and kindness could create a unique, strong bond between a human and a wild animal. As time passed, the cubs grew up and became fully independent, but they continued to visit Patrick's house. Simone often left them to play in the yard while she went into the forest to get food. Patrick rejoiced, watching how his little furry friends had grown. The grown-up cubs also treated Patrick as one of their own, not fearing him at all, and even inviting him to join their exciting games. Patrick hopes for new visits from Simone and her cubs in the future. He continues to keep an eye on the bear family and tries to record them on video as often as possible. His story is a vivid example of how humans and wild animals can interact and build trusting relationships based on love, kindness, and understanding. It's amazing that even the wildest and most independent animals can feel gratitude and appreciation towards members of another species. The friendship between Patrick and Simone continues to grow stronger each year. Every spring, when the bears come out of hibernation and return to an active lifestyle, Patrick eagerly awaits Simone and her family's return. He always prepares treats for them and observes their lives, learning more and more about the behavior and habits of these amazing animals. Patrick has become a true friend to the bears, and his home is now known as a place where bears can feel completely safe. The friendship between Patrick and Simone reminds us of the importance of respectful treatment of nature and its inhabitants, demonstrating that even our small acts of kindness can have a significant impact.